Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcouch. We're back for part two of why some people might have challenges with higher dose T3 therapy. Now, I think one of those things that's really important to understand, listen, if you're taking T3 therapy and you're feeling fantastic on it, hypothyroid signs and symptoms are gone, that's great. My big beef with T3 therapy, especially high dose T3 therapy, is I don't know that we're actually addressing the underlying issue. Most of the T3 that's produced in the body is produced by the peripheral tissues, not by the thyroid gland. And so what happens is people have this tissue cell danger response, tissue hypothyroidism going on. Eventually we develop thyroiditis and we lose thyroid gland production. So now T4 and T3 production goes down. And initially, what's important to know, initially in a hypothyroid situation, from a gland perspective only, there's actually increased conversion of T4 to T3 because the gland's not making enough. Tissues are starting to be deficient, and so they're increasing that conversion. So as TSH goes up to try and drive more production from the thyroid gland, you get increased conversion of T4 to T3 peripherally due to the elevated TSH. So in an allopathic model, they're looking at T4 typically. They're looking at TSH, free T4. If they're good, the assumption is that the T4 is going to be converted to T3. It's got to happen, right? As long as there's enough thyroid hormone. Somebody who's maybe more integrative may say, hey, we're going to look at T3, free T3, look at thyroid antibodies, maybe look at T3 uptake, maybe look at some other factors as well. But what I often see in integrative and functional medicine is somebody will be on thyroid medication, T4, they're still symptomatic. They see an integrative or a functional medicine practitioner who orders the T3 or free T3 and says, oh, you're not converting T4 to T3 very well. You're over converting it to maybe reverse T3, and the reverse T3 blocks the T3 receptors, therefore causing your hypothyroid symptoms. So the person will be told they're going to start giving them T3 medication because that will lower reverse T3, which has a blocking effect on T3, which is not true. And then two is that they're told that they have a polymorphism that they can't convert T4 to T3, and therefore they're going to need T3. Well, if that's the case, why did that kick in when they're in their 30s, right? Why did that kick in when they're in their 40s or 50s? Why didn't they have that issue right from the start? So could there be a genetic polymorphism of the deiodinase-2 enzyme so they have reduced conversion? Possibly, but that's probably not the primary issue for somebody who doesn't have neurodevelopmental disorders. There's probably epigenetic influences, diet, lifestyle factors that are affecting the polymorphism, making it a little bit more sluggish to convert. But more often than not, my belief is that there's some type of cell stress or cell danger physiology going on. And so you get prescribed T3 and you actually feel better initially because there's a lot more ways to get T3 into the cell than T4 into the cell, and that can have a beneficial effect. But remember, if deiodinase-3 activity is upregulated in a cell or a tissue, then the cell is favoring the deactivation of thyroid hormone, not the conversion to T3. So the T4, especially if you've seen this on a lab, if T4 was being converted to reverse T3 at higher levels, then D3 is upregulated. So the other thing we need to consider is that potentially if D3 is upregulated, then T3 is also going to be deactivated or converted to T2. And so you could still feel well potentially because there's an active form of T2 that can really kind of run some of the cells. Not all of the T3 is deactivated, but you get initially some T3, you feel better because the T3 gets into the cell. And then all of a sudden you start to plateau. And one of the reasons you start to plateau is because the cell, if it's in the cell stress response, starts deactivating more of that T3. So now what happens? You plateau and you say to your doc, hey, I was feeling good, now I'm not feeling so good, and now the doctor gives you more. And so now you get your honeymoon phase, you feel a little bit better, and then you plateau again. And the issue becomes you start riding the same roller coaster maybe you were riding with T4. The other thing that becomes an issue, especially if you're taking T4 at the same time, is you can quickly suppress TSH. And when you suppress TSH, now you reduce the conversion naturally of T4 to T3. So you're primarily reliant on the T3 medication you're getting to support T3 at the cells and tissues. So my issue is that we're not probably addressing the true issue, which is why are the cells not wanting to convert T4 to T3? We're just providing what we don't see on a lab. And it's really allopathic medicine, just with a different drug. So here's some other things that we need to take into consideration. Why would we also need to understand, I put on here, why would T3 be low if you have a functioning thyroid gland or if you're on T4? T3 free T3 could be low because there's decreased T4 to convert to T3. So if you have a true glandular hypothyroid situation and your TSH could be normal, your T4 could be low or low normal, but your T3 or free T3 could be low because there's not much thyroid hormone to be made. Now that's usually not the case early on because the body will start to increase the conversion. But that's one possibility. The other is that there's some type of cell stress response going on, so the tissues don't want to convert T4 to T3. And this is the mechanism that I often see when I'm working with clients. So is there a downside just to load somebody with T3 medication? Well, we already talked about the kind of honeymoon phase. I already talked about the fact that as you start to increase TSH, you can suppress, or increase T3 dosage, you can start to suppress TSH. The other thing that can happen is you see a lot of people start to have some hyperthyroid type symptoms in specific tissues, and at the same time that they're having hypothyroid type symptoms. Sex hormone binding globulin, when you start to increase the amount of T3 in the system, that can cause a rise in sex hormone binding globulin. And the problem with that is that as sex hormone binding globulin goes up, you have decreased free hormones, especially your free hormones, free estrogen, free testosterone, right? So free hormones go down. So on a blood panel, somebody just looked at your total testosterone, total estrogen levels. They would say, well, you have plenty of hormone, but you don't have much free. So we're talking about androgens, estrogens, and cortisol. So if you're a person who's running maybe a Dutch test and you see low cortisol, low free cortisol, but higher metabolized cortisol, you might have lower free cortisol because you're bombing the body with T3. It's causing a rise in the binding globulin, these transport proteins that carry cortisol, estrogen, and androgens around the body, and therefore there's less free cortisol to be able to get to the tissues. Elevated reverse, as you take more and more T3, that can drive up ferritin. And some people would say, hey, that's great because ferritin needs to be between 80 and 100 for optimal health. And I don't know where that came from. I don't agree with that for most people. I think that we can't just look at ferritin and say, hey, that needs to be 90 for health. I'd like to see where those studies are that say that's the range, especially when ferritin is primarily a tissue protein, not a serum protein. Typically the reason we see ferritin levels elevated is not because you have great iron storage, but because you have tissue damage, you have chronic inflammation, maybe chronic infections. That's the reason. So as you increase T3, ferritin production goes up, and as ferritin goes up, it can scavenge iron from the system, and put it into storage. But elevated free ferritin on its own is thought to drive inflammation and oxidative stress. So something that you really don't want. And the third thing that's really important here, and I already talked about it, is taking T3 when you're not converting T4 to T3 well doesn't address the root issue, which is why are the cells actively downregulating the conversion? Why does the body want to slow down its metabolism? There's no easy answer for that, but that takes some time, that takes some work, some investigation. Adding the T3, makes the labs look better, may give you a temporary bump and improvement in your symptoms, but oftentimes people wind up on stronger and stronger doses and still don't feel well. If you have any questions regarding this post, put them below wherever you watch the video, and I'll try and get those questions answered. All right? Have a great day. Hopefully this helps you.